The following is a completed excerpt from an in-progress research project analyzing the presentation of race in Red Dead Redemption 2. This video will only address one specific side mission that becomes available to the player in the game's third chapter. While it can be difficult to find genuine racial commentary in Red Dead Redemption 2's iteration of the post-war South, there are a handful of optional missions that specifically tackle racial subject matter on a more substantial level. The first of these is called the Iniquities of History, and sees Arthur breaking into a foreclosed home in the South to retrieve some keepsakes on behalf of the past owner, Jeremiah Compson. Arthur first meets Compson in the dusty southern town of Rhodes, sprawled out on a park bench, drunkenly bemoaning his previous station in life, and how they stole everything from him.
Look at me. Useless. I wasn't born to this. I didn't deserve this. I used to be a gentleman. Jeremiah Compson. Compson's stead.
Good for you, if that's anything to boast about.
They took everything from me.
Who did?
They.
And what did they take?
My whole life. A whole way of living, a career.
He asks Arthur to retrieve an old watch, pistol, and ledger from his home, because the bank won't let him near it. The ledger is of particular importance to him. It's part of his history.
Okay, what is all this old crap?
While searching for the keepsakes in Compson's old home, the player has the option to pick up several discarded documents, photos, and personal letters that gradually give Arthur insight into Compson's life. By reading through the material, the player learns that Compson used to work in some capacity handling property at a plantation, and that he took great pride in his work. In a note addressed to Compson written in 1855, the plantation owner praises him.
Like your old pa, you're a cunning old dog and a credit to this community.
In 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, Compson was fired and subsequently failed miserably working for the local railroad. Eventually, his drinking pushed his children away, and he lost his family home to the bank. A letter from Compson's son reads,
None of us want anything to do with you.
To retrieve the ledger Compson wants, the player must head down into a cellar, where Arthur learns that Compson worked as a slave catcher for the plantation. The dingy room features chains and shackles lying on a mud floor, a handful of uncomfortable raised planks meant to serve as beds, and discarded whips and punishment collars sitting on a cabinet. The ledger Compson was so attached to features a list of black slaves and the reward money he earned by returning them.
Negroes recovered in 1856. Rewards: January 15th, Betsy, $17. January 18th, Louis, $12. May 18th, Wilfred, $18. May 24th, Minnie and Child, $20.
This your ledger? A list of slaves?
Disgusted, Arthur leaves. When Arthur returns to Compson, he dumps the items at his feet and burns the ledger as Compson cries out that emancipation pissed on his legacy and that he still exists.
Oh man!
Oh man! You show some respect. I was respected once. I had a profession.
You asked me to get you something.
There's no bringing back what I want. I want my job, my pride, the respect accorded to a gentleman.
What about this old crap? Huh?
My things. Don't you understand? Those bastards, they changed everything. I was a good worker. I took pride in my work. They took it away. Pissed on my legacy.
Old man, some jobs ain't for saving. And some legacies,
Oh,
they are for pissing
what
on.
are you doing? That's my history. Ah! Damn you. I still exist. Oh.
Unprompted by the game, the player can choose to kill Compson. Interestingly, the player will gain honor on Red Dead's in-game honor scale, regardless of if they spare or kill Compson. In a game that, in other ways, is so content to cut around the harsh racial realities of the post-war South, the Inequities of History stands out in Red Dead Redemption 2 because it tackles this type of subject matter at all. Its handling of slavery is especially noteworthy. Compson's cellar is a dirty and miserable room, reminiscent of artists' depictions of cramped transatlantic slave ships. The inclusion of discarded whips and collars brings to mind the physical torture Compson's victims had to endure for the crime of running away from enslavement. The contents of the ledger is another inspired inclusion. The long list of names and the frequency of escape attempts demonstrate how desperate African American slaves were to leave a life in bondage, and the inclusion of Minnie and Child on the list serves to remind the player that the racism and economic bottom line of institutionalized slavery did not stop to consider questions of age or family separation. The player can also find a discarded note in the cellar written by a literate slave that paints an appropriately haunting picture.
Well, that's that. I was somewhere near Rose when they caught me. To the day I die, I ain't gonna forget that sound of that dog barking at my heels. But I don't suppose that day gonna be far off yet. It was 50 lashings yesterday and 50 more to come. Don't think I could take no more. Man said he was doing his job. Funny kind of employment if you ask me. But I suppose you ain't.
The Inequities of History condemns both slavery and Compson's actions, admittedly a very low bar to clear. However, the mission's depiction of Compson's life after the Civil War is troubling and reinforces historical misconceptions about the economic devastation of white slavers and plantations after the Civil War. Following the war, Compson was let go from the plantation he worked at. Compson's dialogue and in-game documents heavily imply that this is largely due to emancipation. By the game's logic, a lack of explicitly enslaved blacks means there is no need for a slave catcher. While this is technically true in name only, the game's depiction of the economic struggles of men like Compson is inaccurate. After emancipation, the majority of slave catchers like Compson transitioned into similar roles, tracking down black freedmen who, under black code laws, were often unable to legally leave the plantations on which they worked. Other men like Compson tracked down and arrested black men who didn't have jobs, because being both black and unemployed was illegal. Other slave catchers enforced black codes and segregation as part of the South's law enforcement. This was paid work, and ensured that ex-slavers continued to enrich themselves on the misery of African Americans. The words slave and slavery may have been stripped from Southern laws, but make no mistake, slavery continued well after the Civil War, and thus men like Jeremiah Compson had no economic fear. As historian W.E.B. Du Bois states,
"The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again toward slavery. A new slavery arose."
While the inaccuracies found in Compson's story are seemingly a historical oversight, this misrepresentation has larger negative implications. Like popular Reconstruction-era films, such as The Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind, The Inequities of History overstates the negative economic impacts of Reconstruction on white slavers, and ignores the continued suffering of blacks after the Civil War for the purpose of painting Southern whites like Compson in a sympathetic light. This is a potentially dangerous message to Red Dead Redemption's player base of over 43 million. The mission's examples of the horrors of slavery found in Compson's cellar can be lost amidst the story of an economically devastated man. The following Reddit comment regarding the mission is a perfect example of this occurring.
The mission really showed how a completely valid and legitimate job and industry was suddenly wiped out full stop, and how it affected those that were part of it. After killing Compson, I was surprised to see I was given positive honor points, and a little irked by it. Seems more a modern statement than something relative to the time period.
Due to the inaccurate depiction of Compson and the supposed economic devastation felt by real-world men like him, the mission's overarching message regarding the evil of Compson's work as a slave catcher is lost on this player. This is far from the only example, as comment sections discussing the mission are full of players, many of them misled by the game's inaccuracies, defending and sympathizing with Compson.
I still exist!
With the mission explicitly making use of concepts such as erasing history and people like Compson still existing, language common to modern lost cause debates over the presentation of Confederate history, it's difficult to determine if Dan Houser and the game's other writers intended Compson to be a genuinely sympathetic character, or if players already inclined to believe lost cause myths are simply misinterpreting his characterization. Regardless, it is unfortunate that the game relies on old misconceptions when depicting Compson as a character, because the depiction of pre-war slavery in the Inequities of History is well done.